course, you might need a medical enema. There's some enema plungers, and in case there's any doubt about what this urn is for, you can just have a quick look at the illustration there. I'm Jessica, the Museum Guide, and today I'm at the Wellcome Gallery Medical Collection at the Science Museum, which is what I think the best medical museum in London, if not the world. This is just one part of the Science Museum in South Kensington, which is a humongous museum. It's got a lot of different departments, but today we're just going to focus on the Wellcome Medical Collection, which is 5 really big galleries in its own right. Let's get one thing clear. This museum isn't like a children's medical museum where you can like walk through a large intestine like Magic School Bus style. This gallery is mainly about the history of medicine from ancient times all the way up to the modern day, yes, even including exhibits about COVID-19. These galleries detail the history of medicine in all of its guts and glory. It's an unsparing look into what makes modern medicine the way that it is. Now, the best medical collection in London? That's a bold claim, especially for me to make. If you've watched my channel before, thanks for coming back, but you know I love a medical museum, and my most viewed video on this channel is about the Hunterian Museum in Holborn. That's also a museum of surgical history, but it's about one man's life and collection, although it branches off into more subjects. There's also the old operating theatre and Herb Garrett, which is my personal favorite, a Victorian operating theatre turned into a museum, and the offbeat and modern Wellcome collection, which we're going to talk about at length a little bit later on. But this collection, well, is a mind-blowing repository of objects and stories dating back thousands of years and telling a really comprehensive story of Western medicine. If you had visited this collection about 15 years ago, like I first did, you might have been a little bit underwhelmed. It was very much an old kind of dusty things in glass cases kind of museum, and it wasn't very engaging. However, it has had a massive restructuring and renovation, and it's now being given the treatment that it deserves. To me, this is the most dynamic and exciting medical collection that I've ever been to. If you're new to my channel, welcome. I'm so delighted to have you here. And if you're a returning viewer, welcome back. I'd love it if you hit subscribe, like, and comment. Also, if you're interested in receiving an extra video tour every month, you can head on over to my Patreon channel where you can become a patron and support my work. Now let's go over a bit of the history of this museum. The Science Museum was founded in 1857 in the aftermath of the Great Exposition in London and was originally built to house a lot of patented machines. I mean, that's something it still features. It was part of the South Kensington Museum along with what would later become the Victoria and Albert Museum across the street. Remember, I've got a video all about the oddities of the Victoria and Albert. Today, I'm touring these 5 galleries called Medicine, the Wellcome Galleries. There are over 3,000 exhibits here, specially curated to tell the story of the history of medicine. Of course, we're not going to have time to see them all, I wish. But I do private tours of this gallery if you're visiting London. I'm going to focus on my personal favorites, and I'll also call back to objects in this museum that reference other video tours that I've done of medical museums. Let's dive in. So the first thing that you notice when you enter this gallery is Self-Conscious Jean. It's this huge statue of a human body by artist Marc Quinn. You might remember him from my death mask video because Marc Quinn made the blood mask in that video that sparked a lot of conversation. This portrays the artist, actor, and model Rick Genest, known as Zombie Boy. He had a brain tumor in his teens and started to have anatomical images tattooed all over his body by tattoo artist Frank Lewis. In this statue, he holds a medical anatomy book, which is, of course, the subject of many of the things in this gallery. Anatomical tattoos and this history of illness. And so Marc Quinn says, I think to have this sculpture of Rick at the museum is the perfect link of the past and the present between the Wellcome collection and the real world, and between the rarefied environment of the museum and the world as it is now. Here's a photo of the real Rick Genest. You can see what kind of a likeness Marc made. Wow. One of my favorite things in this entire museum is right at the beginning here. It's this female wax anatomical model, and it comes from a little section called Studying the Dead. This dates to 1818, and just looking at it, I know that it comes from Italy, likely from Bologna or Florence, and indeed it does come from Florence. This is the work of Italian model maker Francesco Calanzuoli. He was renowned for being one of the finest medical wax creators in Italy at the time. Kind of like a plaster anatomical model, you can remove a few of her organs for closer scrutiny. This is a really interesting model because many of them are of women in these kind of euphoric and almost orgasmic kind of ways, and that is something that's been studied extensively. My friend Carla Valentine, the curator of Bart's Pathology Museum, she actually has written about the sexualization of these wax anatomical models. Here's another, you can see even more what I'm talking about here, a wax anatomical Venus. The reason that they were called Venuses is because they were meant to be these idealized beauties that could also show off the organs of the body. Waxworks were an incredibly important part of medical history. You can even see in the female anatomical models, you often have even a fetus showing a pregnant woman. But of course, not all of the wax models are beautiful. I think that they are all beautiful, but not all of them are meant to be of these kinds of attractive women. You have here two waxes that were actually created by Anna Morandi, and you can see a photo of her here in the display case. She was one of only a few professional female wax model makers, and remember, about a generation later you would also have Madame Tussaud, who started making medical waxes when she was capturing the decapitated heads of guillotined nobles during the French Revolution. But before her, Anna Morandi married Giovanni Manzolini, an assistant to a wax model maker, and together they worked on dissecting and creating wax models that were unclaimed from local hospitals. Let's stay on this topic of medical models, and we can see here a paper mache, or for my British viewers, papier mache model that was created by French anatomist Louis Arzeau. He introduced paper mache anatomical models because he found that the wet paper process was a lot more forgiving than using waxes. My medical model at home is also a paper mache. Going back to Florence in the 18th century, we have a series of 6 wax anatomical features. They progressively show the body being stripped of its layers. These are actually small versions of life-size models produced and displayed at the Science Museum in Florence, and they're still famous for their medical wax museum. They were created by this master wax model maker called Clement Susini, and there's actually a wax of him at the La Specola Museum. That is really short on my list. I'd love to go to Florence next year. Okay, now that we've had a look at the waxes, we're going to walk a few steps back to another side of the wall, and we're going to talk about the origin of the anatomy school. So the person in this case right here, and who's depicted down here, they're a pair of brothers called William and John Hunter. You'll remember their names from the Hunterian Museum. If you haven't watched that video and you enjoy this video, that one's a must because it really goes into depth about these two guys and the rise of the anatomy school. William Hunter went on to open the most renowned anatomy school in London in 1768, and his brother John would go on to carry that torch, open his own anatomical schools, and carry out really important research and amass a humongous collection of medical specimens. See, by the 1700s, you needed to study anatomy to become a doctor. You needed a practical knowledge of the working parts of the body that you could only gain through dissection. However, the laws in this country were very complicated. I detail them in my video about the history of surgery. And essentially, it was illegal to obtain the bodies that you needed for the dissection. That's going to come up again in a few minutes. But these guys, the Hunters and many others, did find a way to get the bodies that they needed, and they brought them to the dissecting table in their anatomy schools. These dissections would draw crowds. People would come to watch out of interest, but also to gain the qualifications that they needed and understand the body. This dissecting table was used between 1750 and 1870. You can see there is a hole up at the top for the head to rest in and keep the body flush on the table. The other holes, well, you can use your imagination. This is for the ichor and other liquids, blood and lymph and fluids to escape out of the body. We've got some dissecting tools, and you need your apron, and even more tools of the trade here. In the back here you can see this interesting tripod headrest and lots of other surgical knives, hooks, and this little ball of what looks like string. I bet you that that's actually cat gut, which is, as it sounds, cat intestines that was used as a good surgical thread. Okay, so we've seen a lot of waxes already. Remember the Italian ones a few minutes ago, and here's some more wax models of a head and skull on the top shelf here. But down on the bottom shelf we get into the real gory stuff. I mean, there's still quite a lot of flesh preserved here because these are preserved human left hand and a preserved human left arm. These would have been preserved using an écorché technique of injecting fat and wax into the bodies. This can keep them preserved for a very long time, as we learned at the Fragonard d'Alfort Museum. You've also got a model of a torso showing a skin disease. Okay, here's a little bit more of a sanitized version of an écorché model. This one is made out of, I think, plaster. Oh, it could also be made of wax and bronze to be small and portable. And this is for students of people like John Hunter so that they could take them where they needed them to go. Now, a few moments ago, I alluded to the fact that these guys didn't have enough of the medical cadavers that they needed to conduct the postmortems and dissections required for medical licensing. Well, this little section is called the dark side of dissection. A regular supply of bodies was needed, and dissection could only be carried out on criminals, and so men like those in this drawing, you can see these men. They're grave robbers, but they're not there to steal the material objects from the grave. They're there to steal the body itself, as you can see them doing. These guys were body snatchers, grave robbers, but they preferred to be called, of course, the resurrectionists. And you can see in this image, the field of the churchyard is leading straight into the anatomical theater. The civilized men, civilized in quotes, waiting for their patient to be brought in. They knew exactly where they were coming from, by the way. Now here we have a really large iron cage that was designed to protect a body. I have a small iron coffin in my first video about the most macabre things in London's churches, but this is a huge one. This would have only been a rental. It's known as a mort safe, and it would be rented by grieving relatives to protect the fresh bodies. Remember, after too long, an advanced state of decay sets in, and the bodies are no longer worth anything to the resurrection men or to the medical students. And so the mort safe could then be removed from the coffin and moved elsewhere. As I'm walking around, you might be hearing like bloop, 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 bloop. Yeah, that's actually part of the museum. It only opened in 2019, so it has a lot of really advanced and modern museum curation, including these touch screens that I'll show you now. So we can see here, examining the dead, digital postmortem, how imaging is replacing the scalpel. Oh, again, I mentioned Carla Valentine. There she is there. But screens like this just give you a little bit of extra information as you're walking through the museum, make it more multimedia experience, and also hopefully engage young people. Okay, so another cool thing here is we can actually feel and touch different pieces of the curation. We've got here a skull chisel and rib shears. And you can actually push a button and more information will come through these headphones. But essentially, pathologists use these tools to cut through the bone during a postmortem examination. For my American and Canadian viewers, a postmortem is what is the term in Britain and probably other places too for what I would have grown up calling an autopsy. So we just saw the postmortem examination table of the Hunter brothers and their time period, but here we have a more recent post-mortem table. Not that recent, still 100 years old. But this is a post-mortem table from 1921 to 1930. This was in London's Rotherhithe mortuary. And you can see there is a drain in the middle, the same reason that there were those holes in the other table. And over here, the Salter scale that was used to weigh the organs. This one dates from about 1955. On the wall, you can see the 5 steps of a post-mortem examination. A long incision, down the front of the body, then across the back of the head, organs examined by eye, and if further information is required, pieces of tissue taken, and finally the organs returned to the body. Now, this is quite interesting here. I did say that there are things in this museum right up into the present day. These are post-mortem tools used in 2016. Bone saws, wire gloves. This knife right here, number 16, that's a brain knife. And the thing that makes me shudder the most, those rubber boots. Yeah, you know exactly what those are for. Up on the back wall, some medical specimens taken from the bodies during post-mortem examinations, and also slides. Historically, during dissections, if a medical student or a surgeon saw something interesting, they might actually pluck it out of your body, preserve it in formaldehyde or other liquids, and use it as a teaching object. There are a few different pathology museums in London whose collections are made up mostly of body parts in jars. Even though the circumstances surrounding so many aspects of dissection and postmortems are grisly and grim and unethical, with the stealing of corpses, we can't deny that dissection and postmortems have made medicine what it is today. It taught the early doctors so many things, including about childbirth, and it made childbirth a lot safer over time. This is a study called The Anatomy of the Human Gravid Uterus by William Hunter. He did the study while the illustrations were done by the Dutch painter Jan van Riemsdyk. To create these drawings, he worked from plaster casts of a woman who had died at the very end of her pregnancy, and you can see a nearly full-term child. Now let's also talk about Sarah Stone. She was an accomplished midwife in the 1700s, and she actually published a book called A Complete Practice of Midwifery in order to teach other female midwives the study of helping women give birth. It was very unusual for a woman to attend postmortems, but Sarah Stone did just that. She argued against the increasing practice of male midwives, arguing that they were just trying to surgically control the procedure and that they should not be a part of what was otherwise a women's profession. They were, by the way, called man midwives. Both the Hunter brothers were man midwives. She said, "I cannot comprehend why women are not capable of completing this business when begun, without calling in of men to their assistance, who are often sent for, and when the work is near finished, and the midwife, who has taken all the pains, is accounted of little value, and the young men command all the praise." Essentially, she's saying that the doctors are coming in and taking the credit for the work that the midwives are actually doing. And today in the NHS, which is the British Health Service, birth is actually a midwife-led practice. A doctor, physician only comes into the room if there's some kind of an emergency. An instrument here to study embryo development, and up on the wall behind us here, wax engravings of human development from Austria, 1800 to 1830. Oh, now these absolutely make me shudder. These are 3 pairs of metal forceps with leather coverings. Yes, leather. Not exactly hygienic, but people didn't know. This is before the era of germ theory. These were used between about 1700 to 1850. Remember, germ theory becomes very popular around 1850. And these were invented to grip and turn the head of a baby during a difficult labor. They probably did save a lot of babies and mothers, but they would have also been the culprit for a lot of infections setting in. I love this. So you've got an early stethoscope made by René Laennec. He was a French doctor, and he noticed, and here's one of his stethoscopes, he noticed that if he held a tube to a person's chest, he could hear sounds in their body more clearly. Doctors used to just put their ear to your chest. And I love this interactive model here. I can grab a replica of a stethoscope, place it on the body and actually listen to the sounds that it makes. That's great for kids. And here's some more modern examples of stethoscopes showing you the changing styles from 1830s right through to the 1980s, going from left to right. 1830, 1855, 1910 to 1940, and finally the Littmann stethoscope from 1982. Now, I honestly think that this is one of the most interesting cabinets in the entire first part of this museum, but I'm not going to spend too much time on it just because I already made a video specifically about this topic and I covered this cabinet in depth. This is all about measuring the mind, death masks, and the pseudoscience of phrenology, which was the idea that you could measure someone's skull and you could learn about their ethnicity, their mental capacity, and their soundness of mind. I always say that the Victorians loved a pair of calipers, and of course there's a skull being measured right there. Now, some of these are life masks, that is, cast before the person had passed away, often for artistic purposes, and there are death masks here of criminals. It was very common to pathologize criminal behavior and try to figure out what was physiologically wrong with a person that would lead them to behave in certain ways. That's why you'll often find death masks in like prison museums and prison history. Here's a replica phrenology skull. I always give it a pat when I walk by. And a set of 60 miniature heads. Again, these are in that other video, but I just can't resist talking about them. These were used to teach phrenology, and they would be taken from classroom to classroom. Some of these heads are wild. Oh wow, here's a little automaton kind of machine here. Automaton representing health screening in Britain. From the late 1800s, scientists and doctors began to study and record what they saw in healthy individuals in addition to treating the sick. Pregnant women, babies, and children became the focus, where regular health checkups measured their development. Surveying people in this way helped doctors to draw wider conclusions about the health of society as a whole. And this automaton was made by Paul Spooner in 1994, and you can see the doctor measuring the different heights of the children, the midwives weighing the babies, and up on the top the nurse listening to the chests of the patients. This is both a kind of celebration, I guess, of the NHS, but it might also be an indictment. I'm not sure. One of my favorites. This comes up actually in medieval paintings a lot because there's a couple of saints. Are they listed here? No, but Damien and Cosmos, they're twin saints, and one of them holds a flask of urine as his kind of saint's object that he holds. You can see on the back here, diagnosis by color of urine, if someone has pale straw color all the way up to brown urine. And I love this little arrow here that the doctor, if it's transparent yellow, can also taste the urine for signs of sweetness. I know a lot of doctors throughout history did taste urine. They were obsessed with urine. A lot of them could also diagnose diabetes from the smell of the urine, but some insisted on tasting it. That's their own thing, man. Oh my goodness, there he is. Saint Cosmos inspecting urine. This is a Spanish statue icon dating from 1770. I love that. I knew Cosmos would be around here somewhere. You can see that, yeah, urine's been used to diagnose illnesses for thousands of years. But of course, an even more important and common way to test for illness was to assess and balance the blood. We'll talk a little bit more about bloodletting later on. I think that there's another display case about it, but this just says that blood is a rich source of information for doctors. But you can see that the bowl was used to collect blood. This is 18th century, I believe, and these little kind of almost looks like a matchbox and a little almost looks like nail files. Those are not. Those are lancets and the lancet container, and that's what would be used to slice your vein. An early electrocardiograph to measure the heart's electrical activity dating to 1930. Wow, it's a beautiful machine in addition to being so important. An early advocate of the electrocardiograph was British heart specialist Thomas Lewis. Here's his photo here. And this is how the patient would be positioned. Their hands and feet were placed in salt water to complete the circuit. And here we have American doctor Mary Putnam Jacobi. She used a sphygmograph to overturn long-held beliefs about the physical limitations of women during menstruation. Her studies showed that women did not have a weaker pulse during menstruation and could therefore engage in a wide variety of professions without limitation. This is neat. Actually, when I did my video on the history of surgery, I don't think I looked at this. I don't think I even knew it was here. This is a watch owned by renowned surgeon Joseph Lister. He's really important in that video and to the history of surgery. This watch dates to 1853. And why do they have it here with all of the pulse measuring equipment? Well, because with the simple addition of a second hand, his watch could be used to measure a pulse accurately. Back to blood. Interesting, the invention of blood grouping, 1940 to 1981. That's because donating blood became widespread during the First World War, and it was thought originally that there were just 3 blood groups, A, B, and O, but there are in fact more than 35 variations. The serum test to learn about these different variations was invented in the 1950s, and since then, modern blood transfusions have been possible. Ah, very cool. We've got pregnancy testing throughout the years, and this is pregnancy testing using toads. 1802, urine from a woman being tested was injected into animals, such as this Xenopus toad. The toad reacted to the hormones in the urine of pregnant women by laying eggs. Wow. Specialist hospitals used to use thousands of toads for pregnancy tests. Yes, you heard it here. And the home pregnancy test emerges in the 1980s. Okay, we're gonna go look at something that gives me the These are human stones. These were collected and studied by Kathleen Lonsdale and her team. Thanks, Kathleen. They vary in their composition according on where people lived in the world, their age, and gender. Stones can appear in many human body parts, and although not life-threatening, they can be really painful. Whoa. That is a trypophobia nightmare, and I don't say that lightly. All kinds of large machines and medical equipment over on this side of the gallery. But I'm always really fascinated by these cases here, talking about the origin of magnification and microscopy. So here we have Louis Pasteur's microscope. This is like being close to a celebrity here. French chemist Louis Pasteur established that many diseases result from tiny organisms, such as bacteria or viruses, and this microscope actually belonged to that man. He used this microscope to disprove the theory of spontaneous generation. That was the idea that new life emerged from non-living materials. For example, that maggots and flies just like came out of meat. They spontaneously emerged, or that fleas grew out of dust. And Pasteur is using a microscope like this to say, actually, no, these are, maggots are being born from eggs, fleas are being born from eggs, and we can see them here. Here we have Theodor Schwann's microscope from 1835. He was a German physiologist, and he used this microscope to research the idea that, quote, all living things are composed of cells and cell products. And he established cells as the smallest unit of life. This was groundbreaking when it was first published in 1839. Oh, and this tiny guy, this is a replica, the earliest kind of microscope. This one dates to about 1900, but it's a replica of the original from the mid-1600s. This is made by Dutch cloth merchant Antony van Leeuwenhoek. He was the first person to see microscopic cells of blood, sperm, and bacteria, and he was actually just using his homemade microscopes to reveal a world of knowledge, examining tiny structures like bee stings and fungi. Leeuwenhoek just wanted to see the finer details in the cloth that he was making, but he ended up discovering a whole world around him. He called his extraordinary discovery animalcules, and he wrote to the Royal Society in London. He was elected a member of that society in 1680. Here's some of the drawings that he made of things that he was seeing in his tiny little microscope. A display case about ultrasounds, using sound to see. You can see a sonogram image of a fetus on the back wall there. It's a low-risk technique that was pioneered in Glasgow by Professor Ian Donald, engineer Tom Brown, and Dr. John McVicker in 1957. Blurry originally, but by the 1980s they could produce moving images, and of course today you may have seen that some people even do these three-dimensional scans. This one's from about 2015. Wow, look at this huge contraption. This is an X-ray machine, a rotating X-ray machine from 1925. Patients would step into this machine known as an omniscope to be X-rayed, and you would use counterweights and a motor to position them into different angles. Wow, you can see a photo there. Both on my in-person tours and on my video tours, I am always banging on about cabinets of curiosity, because those are the origins of what we know as the modern museum. It's men, usually men, collecting objects from around the world. They don't have to necessarily be real, and they are displaying them in their homes because they want to tell you three things about themselves. They want to tell you that they are well educated, that they're rich, and that they are well traveled. And Henry Wellcome certainly liked to travel, and he certainly liked to show off his objects. A lot of the things in this case are weird. I love that about them. And the museum, I think, has done a beautiful job of creating a modern day cabinet of curiosities, featuring all kinds of stuff. Let's have a look. This is the lion and tigers and bears moment. We've got artificial hands and totems and wax models. Oh my. But here we go. We have prosthetics from more than a century apart, all different kinds, very modern to very rudimentary, all the way up to the top. Up at the top, I bet you I do know what these are. These, you can see the mortars and pestles and the caduceus, the snake. I think that these were wooden signs hung outside chemist shops. These signs were for marketing medicines if your customers can't read. Medical spoons of all kinds. Oh, I know what these are. These are pap spoons. Pap spoons would be used to feed the, quote, infirm. I know about these from my video about the Foundling Hospital. You can see that, you know, using the kind of lid of the spoon, you can put more food in and kind of slowly tip it into the patient's mouth. These spoons could also be used to give medicines to patients, and especially if you needed to mix it with literally a spoonful of sugar. These are from the, quote, Middle East, and these ones would be used to interpret oil patterns in water to assess your health. Here's a life-size plaster model from around 1900s, and up at the top, these bowls above the plaster model are bloodletting bowls. You can see the little gap in them, so that's a place where you can place your arm. It's got to be Saint Sebastian up at the top there. He is pierced with all kinds of arrows. Saint Sebastian is often associated with the plague because of the wounds that the arrows left on his body. He's not the only plague saint. Saint Roch is another, or Roche, depending on where you're from, is another plague saint. And pipes. Wow, look at these pipes. Look at the different, wow. The skeleton at the top. I don't, oh, that must be a tobacco box with like a ill person in the bed. Ooh, there's a very saucy one. These are amazing. Oh, I love these. And of course, I can't go to any museum without seeing a Fiji mermaid, or this one's a merman. They say here, there are curiosities among the cures in Henry Wellcome's collection, and how curious to find a merman. This is a paper mache or papier mache model, part monkey, fish and bird with teeth, scales and talons. Specimens of these are hugely popular among wealthy Europeans as prized additions to their private collections. That's what I mean about things didn't always have to be, quote, real. But you will find me talk at length about Fiji mermaids in my video about the strangest things in the British Museum. We don't just have anatomical models of humans, there's a horse. Of course, you might need a medical enema. There's some enema plungers, and in case there's any doubt about what this urn is for, you can just have a quick look at the illustration there. This is an earthenware jar made in Spain in the 1600s. There's always people who collect the most fascinating things. Did you ever think about collecting toothpaste tubes? Well, somebody in the past did. Well, not tubes. Stoneware toothpaste pots, common from the 1840s through to the 1920s. Aren't some of these just beautiful? Look at this cherry toothpaste. What's not beautiful though are these tools for teeth just above them. I don't have dental trauma, but if you do, you should probably look away, because you've got these grippers, and then also down below some nice dentures. They're made out of, some are made of ivory, some are made of wood, and some are made of human teeth. Oh wow, an interesting acupuncture model here. This one made in Japan in 1681. I told you, Wellcome collected all kinds of stuff. This machine was used by midwives in the 1950s to deliver pain-relieving oxygen and nitrous oxide, which is still used, probably maybe too much, maybe not enough, I don't know, in the NHS today, called gas and air. It was named in honor of Lucy Baldwin, who, after her losing her first child, campaigned extensively for maternal health equality. In 1929, she established the Anaesthetics Appeal Fund with the aim of making pain relief affordable for all mothers. God bless her. I know these look like a whole display case almost of like Zippo lighters, but no, they are lancets. Good for your bloodletting. If you need to balance the humors in your body and make sure you don't have too much blood, well, then you probably need to head to the barber surgeon, and he'll use one of these to set you feeling better. Safe sex, an important topic. Condom packets, diaphragms, and even lubrication, dating from 1900 to 1987. This case in the center filled with death masks and human face masks. See a mix of death masks, cultural masks, and here, this one that freaked a lot of people out. This is what's called an optometrist's phantom, or an ophthalmological phantom. A phantom in this case means a statue, a face, used as a teaching aid. This one here, this is actually a life mask of a museum employee. All kinds of surgical knives and surgical tools, including some that are making me want to cross my own legs. And then down here, decorative walking sticks. Here in the UK called a stick, called a cane elsewhere, or maybe called a cane and stick interchangeably. But just look at this one here with this vanitas. It is a half skull, half beautiful woman. A lot of them have skulls, wow. The world's first ambulance bicycle, very cool. This was in the year 2000. This bike was owned by Tom Lynch, who was an ambulance officer and former BMX racing champion. My husband used to BMX. He adapted it to carry life-saving medical equipment through heavy traffic so that he could get to injured people even more quickly. He received the Order of the British Empire for that. Oh, we're not done with enemas. Here's a tobacco smoke enema kit. The idea of reviving someone who is nearly drowned by blowing tobacco smoke into their rectum seems bizarre. But in the 1700s, this approach was very rational. And this enema kit was thought to work by providing warmth and stimulating vapors. Believe it or not, kits like this were placed along the River Thames by the Royal Humane Society, so that if you saw someone drowning in the Thames, you could quite literally blow smoke up there, you know what. Now that we've had a look at a little bit of this cabinet of curiosities, I think it's a good time to tell you about Henry Wellcome, because it was his collection that inspired and started this case. You might recognize his name from the Wellcome Trust, which is a museum, but also like a grant-giving medical institution and place of learning across the street from Euston Station. He was a British-American chemist, and he lived from 1853 to 1936. His pharmaceutical company went on to become one of the 4 companies that founded the backbone of GlaxoSmithKline. So we're not talking about a dinky little operation here. He had a very tumultuous personal life, including a divorce that was splashed all over the Edwardian tabloids. And he was known to be a real character, but for our tour, it's important that you know that he was a collector, a mad collector. He loved collecting objects from all over the world throughout his travels. He was also an amateur archaeologist as well. I have a friend who used to work for the Wellcome Trust, and he said that to this day they still find unopened boxes of Henry Wellcome's stuff. I don't know whether he was exaggerating or not, but that should give you an idea of the amount that this guy collected. Over 1 million objects during his lifetime, of which 125,000 of them were medical objects. He wanted to open what he was going to call a museum of man. So the backbone of what we're seeing in the medical collection today comes from the stuff that Henry Wellcome originally amassed. It came under the care of the Science Museum in 1976. By the way, there is also a Wellcome gallery at the British Museum featuring a lot of his ethnographic objects, the ethics of some which are questionable, and yes, a small collection of his objects is still on display at the Wellcome Trust. They used to have more of his stuff on display in a gallery called Medicine Man from 2007, but in 2022 they decided that the gallery contained too many problematic narratives and objects. As the Wellcome Trust stated, if we were curating the space today, we would not choose to display these items through the lens of a single person, Henry Wellcome. This approach focused attention on the person who collected the objects rather than on where they came from, who created them and why, and therefore their full context was obscured. I actually think that that's really fair. It's interesting to point out the name of the guy that collected them, but I think it's much more interesting to find out why they were made in the first place and by who. So that gallery has been reimagined as being human. It's really cool now. I toured that entire gallery, by the way, in my August 2024 Patreon only video. The temporary shows at the Wellcome are always great too. Okay, but back to this display case. Here we have a really beautiful baby carrier, a cradle board. Was made of stretched animal hide specific to the Sioux tribe in America. The baby was secured by straps, its head protected by a woven hood. Growing up in the American Midwest in the 1860s, Wellcome witnessed the persecution of the Sioux people, and he developed an interest in their culture, collecting objects like this one, hopefully ethically, but we never know. If we were born in the early modern period, 1500s to 1700s, something like this alligator would have been very familiar to us. They decorated apothecary shops. Apothecaries were medical practitioners who prepared remedies for their customers' ailments. They were the early precursor to the chemist or pharmacist. Unfamiliar creatures and objects, like an alligator like this, would symbolize their ability to access and harness the medicinal properties of the world. Here in the very center of the case is a scare devil or Caro. He was created in the Nicobar Islands to be placed outside of houses, carved by spiritual healers to ward off bad spirits. All kinds of eyeglasses, including a huge pair that would have hung outside of a shop, and a whole cabinet of hearing aids. Could you imagine using one of these as you get older? And of course here I love that they've got a shell. There's a whole series of statues of mother and child figures created across Africa, such as Gambia, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and Nigeria. These were often created to protect mothers and children from harm, and some of them are associated with fertility, maternity, and twins. Twins are represented here with the Yoruba deities Oduduwa and Shango. Something that often freaks a lot of people out, a display case of glass eyes. These would have been created by a manufacturer in the early 1900s, and you could actually buy display cases of these to take around to house calls to visit your different patients and help them choose their new glass eye. And this is so neat above the eyes too. This is Sherrington's cat. It was made for or by Sir Charles Scott Sherrington. He was a British physiologist, and he wanted to demonstrate animal reflexes, and this was used between 1940 and 1980. I can't imagine it being used in the 1980s. It looks so ancient. Very cool though. A whole cabinet of memento mori. I talk about these a lot in my art history videos because the idea of decorating your home or a painting or your coffin or even a church with skulls, and especially ones as gruesome as this with, you know, snakes coming out of the eye. This translates across all different cultures. These are from Europe and Japan. And memento mori is Latin for remember that you will die. This is supposed to remind us that life is fleeting and you're only on earth here for a short time. So you should think about your afterlife. They also have a dark sense of humor, a lot of them. Look at this little skeleton guy atop of a skull. This clock carrying a candle sitting on top of a coffin. Some Egyptian canopic jars. These date to about 2000 BC. The human-headed Imseti protects the liver, and the falcon-headed Kebeseneuf protects the intestines. These medical jars here, from the bottom all the way up to the top, are a nice nod to Henry Wellcome. They once contained medicinal ingredients. They bear the crest of the Habsburg family because they were the rulers of the home. I covered a lot of these display cases here in my video about the history of surgery. I'm at the Science Museum a lot, it seems, but we can see here some of the origins of the most early hospitals here in Great Britain and around Europe. The hospitals of the medieval period that were called often monastic hospitals. While they did offer medical treatment, many of them were also just hostels for pilgrims and travelers. They could house the sick, but also assist the elderly, the homeless, and those that were unable to work. They were often found in places of pilgrimage. You can see these huge medicine jars with religious imagery on them. Big places like Canterbury or Santiago de Compostela, and that's because people would make pilgrimages at the end of their life and try to get there so that they could die there. It was considered very good fortune to die in a pilgrim site. And so the hostels or hospitals, they share the same word origin. You can see here medieval nurses, sisters attending to a patient, and these are images from the Hospital of Notre Dame. Of course, Henry VIII founded the Church of England in the 1530s, and the role that the church used to play in the hospitals was greatly diminished. That meant that a lot of members of the public could no longer access health care, and something had to be done. It wasn't until the early 1700s that more modern hospitals started to emerge, and I'm using modern very loosely there, and they emerged due to the funding of philanthropists. These were not sponsored by the government or by the church. They were put together by wealthy men and women of means who donated in order to open places of care, sometimes for children, sometimes for women, and sometimes for everybody. A good example is the Foundling Hospital, which was just for orphans or children whose parents couldn't take care of them. And a group of wealthy women petitioned and fundraised to be able to open and sponsor that. So these are the patient statues that used to be on the front of St. Thomas's Hospital from the 1680s. You can see that they've got broken limbs, they're amputees. It took a lot of guts, sometimes literally, to survive an amputation back then. And a pioneer of early hospitals, Florence Nightingale, she believed not in germ theory, which was, of course, our friend Louis Pasteur, and also a man called Joseph Lister, who we're going to talk about very soon. They were pioneering these theories at the time. She believed in something called miasma theory. She based miasma theory on her wartime experiences during the Crimean War, where she observed that people would get better quicker and survive their operations if they had access to fresh air, clean linens, hand washing, etc. Now that's not because of the clean air. Miasma means bad air. It's because, of course, of the germ theory, but she did not believe in germ theory. Now, I walked over here while talking about Florence Nightingale because her ethos in designing hospitals continues to inspire and impact us to this day. This model of a hospital, I just turned on the lights upstairs there, you can see, is from a 1930s hospital. This is a giant maquette, a giant model. But you can see the operating theaters, everything. Nice wide hallways, big open windows. This is designed to the specifications of Florence Nightingale. The big windows, corridors at the back. The model was also used as a good fundraiser. So even though by the 1930s we're inching towards the modern healthcare system, philanthropists still play a big role in any new hospital building, new machines, etc. By the way, this is not actually a model of a real hospital. It's called the King's Fund Hospital model, and it toured the country to imbue communities and medical practitioners with a sense of pride in their profession, but also to encourage them to follow these kinds of best practices when designing and building their hospitals. Thousands of people came to see this, and it inspired a whole new generation of medical buildings in this country, some of which are still in use today, many of which are still in use today. So this next section is from a part of the gallery called Our Journey with Drugs, starting all the way back with anesthetics and germ theory right up until the modern day. So these cases are all about the invention of anesthesia. Here's William Morton's anesthetic inhaler, which was first used at what's called the Ether Dome at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston in 1893. That's a fascinating museum that I recommend anybody visit if you are going to Boston. Of course, you can also use cocaine as pain relief. They did until the 1950s. And Queen Victoria was the first person to use chloroform in childbirth in 1859. Pioneer anaesthetist John Snow successfully gave Queen Victoria chloroform for 2 of her childbirths in 1853 and 1857. Her experience assured many women that this was safe to use. You can see a letter here from Queen Victoria. She wrote of the inestimable blessing of chloroform, which no one can ever be sufficiently grateful for. I promise, I've mentioned his name already, and this is Joseph Lister. He is the star of my video on the history of surgery. He observed, using household items like these wine glasses, these are the actual ones, as well as laboratory glassware, he noticed that urine exposed to the air decomposes, while urine not exposed to the air remains intact. We're back with the damn urine again, aren't we? And there's his microscope, by the way. He and his wife together created experiments in their home, and he concluded that it was something in the air, germs, that was causing the infection. He used this machine, a carbolic acid sprayer. It would spray throughout the air during the operations, and he conducted his first successful operation as a mastectomy on his own sister. This would cleanse the operating theater. At this point, he still believed that there were kind of just germs floating around constantly in the air. It was later that he realized that it was more about the germs on surfaces, but he soaked bandages and stitches in carbolic acid to control the infection, which definitely worked. It was probably a bit too harsh, kills the good bacteria as well. He later introduced rubber drainage tubes to remove infected fluids from wounds. These were shorter and more flexible than glass tubes that had previously been used, and so these reduced the risk of further infection. So you really have these pioneers of anesthetics and germ theory to thank for modern medicine. And I knew that there was another display, yet another display about bloodletting. That's what I mean, like there's kind of things in more than one place here, but you've got lots of different objects all about the pseudoscience at the time of bloodletting. And a nice leech pot here. You have to be pretty posh to afford leeches. They were gathered by women at leech farms, and in 1840s England, 7 million leeches were being imported annually for use in bloodlettings. We've got a copy here of a trepanned skull, the ancient practice of drilling a hole in your brain in order to relieve pressure or even give a sense of euphoria. We know that this person lived after they had a trepanation. This is from 2200 to 2000 BC. We know they lived because some of the bones started to grow back. You'll find trepanned skulls in a lot of different surgical hospitals and in archaeological museums. There's another piece right there. But as the amazing medical podcast Sawbones says, don't drill a hole in your head. Masks for undergoing radiotherapy and radiation therapies. These have been offering hope to cancer patients since the 1890s. This little one here, staff at Leeds Hospital decorate the children's radiotherapy masks to help younger patients relax, so you can be a Batman when you're going through it. These boards here depict individual people's different stories dealing with medical maladies in the healthcare world, and even more medical prosthetics. These ones here belonging to Ed Freeman, born in 1959. He was one of at least 500 children affected by thalidomide in Britain. And these are the prosthetic legs and the crash helmet that he wore as a little boy. Another cool part about this gallery is the chemists. They've replicated the Gibson and Sons optician and chemist in its entirety here. Gibson and Sons Pharmacy dispensed medicines for 140 years to the people of Hexham in Northumberland, Northern England. We can head inside to see many of the original features and see the kinds of services that a typical pharmacy offered to people in 1911. These beautiful jars. You can see here a sight testing room. We can go have our vision checked. And then we've got all of our different medicine components. And maybe we can even buy some chocolate here, toothpaste. This gallery is all about the role that religion and spirituality plays in wellness, well-being, and medicine. There's lots of different religious icons, statues behind me. Let's have a look at a few of these charms and amulets. Almost every culture in the world has some form of charm or amulet. These are objects that are meant to protect against illness or accident, or maybe they just bring good luck. And people use them in a medical context often. You can see the stuffed princely mastigar lizard. This would be hung over the door to protect against the evil eye. That's the big lizard up in the top corner. This hand here, this is a bone amulet shaped like an arm and hand, making the Magnifico gesture to protect against the evil eye. And so many of these objects in this case are designed to protect you and your loved ones against the evil eye. I love this one here. This is a small muslin bag carrying a crust of bread that was used as a cure for a toothache.
This is used by the Jewish.
This one here, this is a buckskin amulet in the form of a tortoise containing a baby's dried umbilical cord. This was made by the Sioux people to protect a female child. And remember, Henry Wellcome collected a lot of Sioux objects. Wow, these are absolutely fascinating. I could look at these all day. Coins and cures. This is from an art installation called Silent Stories, and we can listen to the stories of each one of these people and their medical journey. But this is really what I wanted to look at in this room. These are medical votives. These are from all different kinds of cultures throughout history, all the way back to ancient Mesopotamia and the Etruscan civilization. People would bring representations of the body part that was causing them a problem to the temple. But this was also done in the medieval period. For instance, at Canterbury Cathedral, people would bring a wax replica of the part of their body that was causing them a problem to be tended to by St. Thomas More. There's a wax hand. You can see lots of breasts. Breast cancer, before the era of modern medicine, was almost certain death. Ears up at the top for deafness or other maladies of the ear. Intestines, hands. I see vulvas, a testicle. And statues here of deities and saints from all different religions. This is Dhanvatari, the god of Ayurveda, India's traditional system of medicine, and beside him a figure of a breastfeeding woman, probably Oduduwa. We saw her earlier, a Yoruba goddess. Then a white Tara, often prayed to for health in Mahayana Buddhism. Hygeia, the ancient Greek god of hygiene, health, and medicine. I mentioned him earlier, Saint Roch. He's another Christian saint, typically associated with the plague. He's got a big plague wound on his leg, and you can see here there is a dog bringing him some bread. That's part of his hagiography. Yama, the Hindu god of death and a wrathful god in Buddhism. Buddhists who meditate on Yama seek to overcome their fear of death. And here's Shu Xing, the god of longevity, one of 3 star gods in Chinese beliefs. And at the beginning, a very beautiful 18th century Saint Mary Magdalene dressed in sackcloth, depicted as a repentant sinner. Saint Lucy carrying her eyes that have been plucked out of her head on a platter next to her. Lai Tige is a patron of doctors and pharmacists in Chinese tradition. And of course, here we have Cosmos and Damien again. There's Cosmos inspecting his urine. Guanyin, a Chinese goddess of mercy and compassion. Shapona, the god of smallpox for the Yoruba people of Benin and Nigeria. Ganesh, a god of, he's about protection and luck. Saint Catherine of Alexandria, the patron saint of dying people. And there's some hospices in the UK called Saint Alexandria, and Our Lady of Lourdes, a common depiction of the Virgin, and a container for Nikisi forces. This mirrored container on the belly of this statue is packed with medicines called bilongo to attract Nikisi, that are spirits. The last thing we're going to look at today is this piece of contemporary art. It's called Santa Medicina by Eleanor Crook. This sculpture combines medical and religious symbolism to help us reflect on the frailty of human life. She's both a surgeon and a saint. This healer wears an operating gown which becomes a rich skirt that's encrusted with the protective amulets that you've already seen on display in the gallery. The stethoscope becomes a string of prayer beads, the head mirror a halo. In her skirts, we see a vulnerable, sheltered figure nourished equally by medicine and faith, both in body and soul. And we are actually encouraged to touch this artwork. Here she has a nurse's chatelaine, the stethoscope becoming the rosary beads, and the scalpel in her hand. Well, that's the end of our tour. I hope you've enjoyed this walk through medical history, and I'll see you the next time I'm at the museum.